Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you hanging with us on this Monday. We are Sports Day, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I'm Rob Ellis. It's Bill Colarola, who was in for Tone, who was in for Derek. Appreciate Bill hanging with us as well. All right, joining us right now, he is a must-read and a must-follow as well. You can check him out on Twitter /X at Jeff_McLane. And, of course, Inquirer.com. Also, great listen, uncovering the birds, unbelievable insight to what's happening with the Philadelphia Eagles. That's Jeff McLane. Jeff, welcome to the show, man. How we doing?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Doing well, Jeff. Doing, man, never a dull moment, right? So a lot happening yesterday. Just give me your sense for a couple different things. One, I don't think anybody's really surprised by these, but let's kind of walk through it. Desai, it's reported as being fired. Looks like Patricia's just going to walk because the contract's up. Let's start with those items, Jeff. Was this just only a matter of time? And then we'll get into what's next.
Yeah, this was only a matter of time. For Desai, it was a matter of, when it was going to happen. And it certainly could have happened when they demoted him in week 14. They decided to keep him. And to his credit, he decided to stay and work this thing to the end. But it was clear once they did that both sides were going to want to move on. And then Matt Patricia, obviously the way the season ended, 1-4 with him in charge of the defense, it became a foregone conclusion that he was not going to be here. I didn't know that he was on a 1-year contract. But either way, they would have fired him or whatever, just based upon how he performed. I mean, in his defense, this was a difficult circumstances. These were difficult circumstances for him to have to come in and at first run someone else's scheme and then try to implement some of his ideas, and it just blew up in their faces. But the Eagles, again, like you said, I don't think it's any surprise that if Nick Sirianni is staying, that they were going to have to get another defensive coordinator.
Bill, if I could, just a quick follow-up here. In your estimation, Jeff, was Desai done dirty here by Patricia sort of overlording there, by him being almost scapegoated for the way things began to go off the rails? How do you view Desai's time here?
Well, I mean, obviously the Eagles are well within their rights to do what they felt was going to be in the best interest of the team. Me, I don't give opinions. I will tell you that there were people in the building that felt that way, and they felt even before the demotion that just getting Matt Patricia in there kind of overshadowed Sean, who had 1 year previously as a defensive coordinator, but this was the first time since then. And really, an opportunity for him to kind of go out there and put his stamp on that Vic Fangio defense. One of the things that I had been told was in my podcast was like, just the way the optics of Matt being there. I mean, that happens everywhere where they bring in senior guys to help out, and usually it's to give him a soft place to land. And that was kind of what was behind Matt Patricia coming to Philadelphia, was that Howie Roseman was helping Bill Belichick out. And then of course, Nick Sirianni went through the process of interviewing him and liked him enough to keep him on staff. But, Matt's offense was closer to Nick's, and it was in a position where like he could go there and talk to him perhaps more about the defense. I mean, obviously Matt had been a head coach, and maybe Nick wanted to talk to him about some of that stuff. I don't know why you'd want to after one of the most disastrous head coaching stints in the NFL, but it's just the optics of that and the relationship that Matt had with Howie Roseman. It rubbed some staffers and coaches in the organization not well. And then it just kind of played out to, we saw what happened. Let me just jump back a little bit too. Like even when Sean was asked about Patricia, first he was asked about it once during training camp and he answered it. And then I asked him actually about it again right before the first game of the season, which made sense because it was against the Patriots and Matt had been there for so long. He could help them out. And Sean kind of said, "Oh, it seems like you guys ask me that every week." And in fact, I've only been asked about it once. So that kind of gave me an indication that, this was something that was bothering him. Maybe it was the question, but to me, I think it was more the fact was that he had to answer the question. And then, so that it's hard if you're in that position to have someone who had won Super Bowls as defensive coordinator before. I think people give Bill Belichick more credit for that than Matt Patricia. But nevertheless, that's a fact that he had won Super Bowls as defensive coordinator. And then in terms of Sean Desai, I think he gets a lot of credit for the way he handled this. And I tweeted this out and spoke to a lot of people in the organization. After it happened, there was not a negative word spoken about him, and his character and his professionalism through the end of this, I think, speaks to him and his character.
And Jeff, what throws me off is if you look back to Sean Desai, not that he was doing a great job as defensive coordinator, but you look at these playoff teams, he held 4 of them to 17 or less points. The Bucks, the Rams, the Dolphins, even the Chiefs to 17 or less. And then there's talk that they took away third down from him earlier in the season, and then eventually they make that move after the Cowboys game to go to Matt Patricia. Have we been able to confirm whose decision that was? Was that Nick Sirianni's decision, or did that come from Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie? Because when Reddick talked at his locker the same week A.J. Brown spoke, Reddick, I thought, made an interesting statement when he said the higher-ups wanted to make a change. He didn't say Nick Sirianni. He said the higher-ups. So to me, I assumed he's talking about Howie. Have you been able to figure out who made that decision?
Yeah, so I was the one to report about the third down. It was at the bye that they started to want to take away the game planning from Desai and hand it to Patricia and a few other assistants. And Sean kind of fought back against that. It was kind of nebulous about who was really deciding it. And I think at one point Sean kind of went rogue and then went back to the way he handles third downs in that Chiefs game. And we saw how well he was in the second half in that regard. They took it away from him full time the week before he was demoted. And then obviously the rest of the way, and the numbers didn't improve. To answer your question specifically about who had made the decision, Nick Sirianni, on the record, he's been asked specifically that question, said it was his decision alone. I asked him at one point, what kind of involvement did Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have in the decision? And he said, oh, well, they're obviously always there guiding me, but that decision doesn't get made on an island. I mean, Nick's got to at least go through those guys before, or at least tell them what's happening. It's not that he needs their approval technically. But look, I mean, I don't have sources telling me that it was something that was forced upon Nick Sirianni. Now, I've been around a long time. I understand how Jeffrey and Howie have kind of stuck their beak into the coaching decisions. I think typically, historically, and this is really more so from Doug Peterson on, not really Andy Reid or Chip Kelly. Doug Peterson on. Jeffrey has more involvement in that regard in terms of like saying, hey, I want this, or like, hey, maybe this. And then typically it's Howie who kind of helps the coach execute it because he has a lot of contacts around the league with agents, and he knows whose contracts are up, et cetera. I mean, he certainly helped out Andy too, and he helped out Chip. And I can give you examples of that if you want. But it was really more so Doug, who didn't have as many connections. And then they didn't really like some of the decisions that Doug had made in terms of his assistants. So this is kind of, been a little bit of a trend. So, yeah, I think it's fair to point that all out. I don't have it written in stone enough to report that this was something that Nick had done only because Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman wanted it to be done.
All right, Jeff, on that same tip here, let's go back to the beginning. Do you know whose idea Desai was? Was that Nick or was that Howie and Jeffrey? Because it seems, and there was a Ralph Vacchiano piece, which I'm sure you saw as well, Fox Sports, that said that there were some who thought ultimately they wanted Denard Wilson here, but they passed on him, and that's a mistake, et cetera, et cetera. Do you know whose idea it was to go to the Desai route and not go with the in-house candidate?
That was Nick.
Okay.
Yeah, so Denard Wilson, he interviewed for the job. There was internal support from players. I mean, Darius Slay's been very vocal about that he was a guy that he thought should at least have stayed, if not as defensive coordinator. I'd heard since then multiple sources and people in the building just said that, whether he should have been the defensive coordinator or not, we don't know. But losing him as a defensive coordinator hurt. Now, I can understand why they couldn't bring him back. When there's a guy that interviewed for the job, if you brought Sean in and Denard's still here and he's got guys that are supportive of him, you could potentially have some sort of division, I think, in terms of who the guys are looking to. So it kind of made sense. There were other reasons for Denard going down to Baltimore to take that defensive defensive backs coach job. It was a lateral move, but he has family down there, and it just made sense for him to move on at that point once he didn't get the job. But it hurt them, and they didn't really have anyone as strong in that spot. They elevated DK McDonald, an old-time colleague of Nick Sirianni's, and this isn't a shot against DK. He's young, and maybe just it takes some time for him to mature into that role. But it hurt them in that room, especially with so many young defensive backs.
Yeah, so that's what I don't understand, though. Did they not have total faith in Sean Desai? Because you mentioned they keep Matt Patricia around for whatever reason. Why not give Denard Wilson a shot? I mean, I could understand it if you went out and you found a defensive coordinator that was someone you had total confidence in. You knew he was going to do a great job with your defense. We're not going to give Denard Wilson a shot. Why make that decision when you go with the guy that you clearly don't have 100% faith in with Sean Desai?
Yeah, I think we have to go back to the original timeline. I mean, look, Jonathan Gannon hadn't yet interviewed for the Cardinals job. He did interview for the Houston job. So the Eagles knew that he was potentially going to leave, and they obviously have to be proactive in that, in finding his replacement. And Vic Fangio was the guy. They already had him in the building. He was a consultant and helping them out through various points of the season and heading into the Super Bowl. And he was the guy. But the Dolphins had offered him. He didn't know if Gannon was coming back. The Eagles didn't know if, the Eagles thought Gannon was coming back. They thought the Cardinals had moved. They didn't even know that he was kind of on the radar for the Cardinals. And obviously we all know now what happened. Jonathan Gannon moved on to the Cardinals, and the Eagles had to scramble to find someone with Fangio committed to the Dolphins. And so they were behind the eight ball, and they interviewed a bunch of guys. I think that from what I understand, their top choice was Glenn Schumann, the defensive coordinator for Georgia, University of Georgia, and he did not take the job. And so then they moved on to other guys, and Desai being one of those. And it was Fangio it was Fangio's endorsement, which played a significant role in the Eagles hiring him. He told them, he said, from what I understand, hey, if you can't get me, but the next best guy, I would get Sean Desai, because they wanted that scheme. It was a scheme that Jonathan Gannon had employed for the most part, a variant of it. And the same goes for Desai, who tutored under Vic Fangio in Chicago for a number of years and then succeeded him as defensive coordinator.
All right, Jeff. So Jeremy Fowler from ESPN's reporting that Ron Rivera will be interviewed for the defensive coordinator job.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I know people may say, oh my God, retread, but the last time he was a D coordinator, and it was then San Diego, his teams were, second, actually the 3 years they were second, fourth, and second in terms of defensive ranking. So they were good as a defense coordinator. He's also a guy who was a big believer in linebackers. Are they change? I guess where I'm going with this is not necessarily Rivera, but do you think philosophically they're going to change things up, maybe what their beliefs are, or their core, not giving up the big play, not emphasizing linebacker maybe as much? How do you view the route they might go defensively?
Yeah, so the Ron Rivera interview, they're going to interview a bunch of guys. But since he's the first big name that's out there, it's interesting. One would suggest that maybe they want one of these, as one of the players told me we need is a warhorse. So meaning a warhorse coordinator, meaning the type of guy that probably isn't going to get a head coach job, been around for a long time, someone the players will ultimately look up to with a great amount of respect, and someone that clearly has a strong record over the years of running defense or offense. And in this case, obviously, Ron Rivera has been a very good defensive coordinator. Yeah, retread in terms of a head coach, retread in terms of a defensive coordinator, but not exactly like Jim Johnson, but definitely older in the Jim Johnson way. If you get my drift, Jim Johnson didn't have head coaching opportunities before or after he became the Eagles defensive coordinator. So, and then of course, in terms of scheme, Ron Rivera is a guy that is, an acolyte of Jim Johnson and that style. Now, is he always exactly like what Jim Johnson had done? No, but that could suggest that the Eagles are going back to maybe the more aggressive defense that they were historically known for. To me, the Eagles should just kind of just get the best guy you can get and let him run his scheme. They're going to have, obviously there's some scheme specific players on this roster you have to be careful about if you're going to go heavy, wide 9, 4-man front, because what's that due to Jordan Davis.
Right.
He's just essentially only a rundown guy. But most defenses are multiple up front anyway, so I don't think that'd be a huge issue. But the Ron Rivera one's an interesting one, and I think it does play to maybe how the Eagles view what they're going to do a coordinator, in that you just don't want to have guys that you potentially are losing year after year if they are successful on either side of the ball.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I know the Commanders lacked personnel this year, but that was the worst defense in the NFL. So not great, but I agree. Ron Rivera has had a lot of success in this league for a while. But I want to jump over to offense for a second and specifically talk about Jalen Hurts and this locker room. And I apologize if you've been asked this before. You and I haven't had a chance to talk. But from the outside looking in, it appeared that there was something off with this locker room, a culture that we all thought was so strong. Nick Sirianni had done a great job coming in and building this strong culture, and it looked like Jalen Hurts also was a great leader. And now you're starting to see cracks in that foundation. You're starting to see some reports that Jalen Hurts isn't as great of a leader as they want him to be. You started to see things with leaks getting out of the locker room about the offense being predictable. A.J. Brown refusing to talk to the media. What happened? Are you able to figure out, is there a fracture in that locker room between players and coaches? What's going on?
I mean, I've been around long enough to know that when things are bad, there's like two ways of looking at it, right? It's either it's bad because the culture's bad, or the culture's bad because the culture's bad because they're bad. Typically it's probably just a combination of the both, and I think that's how it is in this regard. And a lot of it does start with Jalen. I mean, I'm the one who did a lot of reporting on what some key leaders in the organization want from Jalen as he matures here. We have to remember he's only 25 years old. I mean, he's far from a finished product. That being said, Jalen is very much who he is for the most part. And there is a lot of positive about that. Certainly in terms of his work ethic, the way he handles himself. You don't have to worry about this guy off the field at all. Very smart, very good athletically, very good as a thrower, all that stuff. He has it in terms of what they wanted as a franchise quarterback. But, there were some who felt that this year he was different. And certainly it started very early. I don't know if it had something to do with the franchise contract or losing Shane Steichen, but he wasn't and I think a lot of it had to do with the offense. He just wasn't happy with the way things were going and wasn't maybe playing to what he thought were his strengths. And I think that filtered down to the rest of the locker room. He is the guy. He does, he's stoic is the word that everyone uses, and it's a fair one to use when you're talking about Jalen Hurts. And, some of the other leaders, in the locker room and in the building felt like, at moments of distress, Jalen's like body language and the way he handled himself just weren't what you need in that moment. Now, there are other leaders in that room who could step up and fill the void, but the quarterback position is it's so important. You need someone to not only be that figurehead, but also when things aren't going well and you're part of that reason, you need to take accountability, even maybe when it isn't your fault. And I think we've seen that in terms of how he's handled some of the questions in news conferences. And from what I've heard internally, it hasn't gone over that way always as well. And I think they want to see some improvement from Jalen in that regard. This isn't a major thing, but when you play that position and things are going bad, you have to look inward and accept that maybe there are some areas in which you need to improve. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Everybody has room to grow. And with Jalen, he's 25 years old, and he's going to be here at least for another 2 more years. There is an opportunity here for that.
All right, let me ask you, Jeff, just about who may be coordinating him. I know Brian Johnson, and I think the Panthers are out on him, but other teams are set to interview him, or he's interviewed or whatever. I think the Eagles are probably holding off because they don't want to hurt his chances. That would make sense. But in your estimation, if he doesn't get a head coaching gig, is he out as the OC or is he back as the OC?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been told that if Nick Sirianni is staying, there's going to have to be mass changes at the coordinator level and at the position coach level. Defensive coordinator is already out. I don't think they want to affect Brian Johnson's head coaching interviews. We just found out there was just a report that he didn't even really end up interviewing for the Panthers job.
Right.
He did do virtual interviews with the Falcons and the Titans. Next step would be in person. I don't know if he's going to get to that level. So it could, and it could happen very quickly, whereas he's out of those job opportunities, and then the Eagles can kind of move on and make it known that he's going to be out. But from what I understand, that's where we're going with this, is that Johnson will not be the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia.
Makes sense.
Let's talk about some of these veteran guys, because originally it was reported that Kelce was retiring, and now they've kind of backpedaled on that. Do you think, specifically with regard to Kelce, that this is just something where he wants to delay it so he can make a formal announcement, or do you think he's actually considering returning next season?
Yeah, so what happened was everything about what Kelce had said to the players in the locker room, body language, that kind of thing, the perception was that, this was Kelce telling everyone that he's probably not going to be back. And that's how it got leaked. And then I was able to confirm it from a couple sources myself. I talked to Jason even before the locker room was open on Wednesday, and he just said, I haven't made a formal announcement yet about my retirement. I have not made a decision yet. And typically Jason wants a few weeks. Like, I think the way he looks at it is like, maybe I feel this way right now, but I owe to myself to give myself some time here to not let the emotions of the season and how I feel physically affect my decision about retirement, which is obviously a major decision for him. My expectation is that eventually that announcement will come. But I'm not in Jason's head, and who knows? And I think maybe what happens here in Philadelphia in terms of the Eagles could also maybe affect what his decision is. But he's leaving the door open, so I'll leave the door open.
He didn't look super stressed yesterday. That's all I'm saying. I'm not reading into it any other way, Jeff. Looked like he was enjoying himself at his brother's game. Well, I think we may see the same in Baltimore.
He's
been
known to do that for many, many years.
All right, last one from I want to hit you with one player, Jordan Davis. And I know there were other guys who certainly fell off towards the end of the year, but it was troubling what a kind of ghost he became there. Is this just a conditioning thing, Jeff? Is there more to it? He seems, I know Dave Zangaro had a piece today where he said, I realize I need to be better. I appreciate that, but is it there for him, you think?
Yeah, so he admitted that he had wore down by the end of the season. Obviously, if you just watch the film.
That was not breaking news either.
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to this. Is one, I think the conditioning thing and staying in shape is an issue for him. And Nick Sirianni even said it as recently as November. He had a really good game, especially down the stretch against the Bills. And he was dealing with some injuries and some nagging stuff. So that factored into it as well. To me, and this is a question that's always been asked of Jordan ever since they drafted him and moved up to draft him in the first round, was like, okay, this is a guy in college that didn't rush the passer much. He was a nose guard who was pretty much, played run downs. Amazing 40 time and all the other stuff in terms of his physical capabilities to make you believe that, okay, this is a guy that can play all three downs. But he didn't do it in college very much. Now, how a lot of that to do with the fact that they were always getting out ahead in wins, and they didn't even do that. But
loaded with talent, yeah.
Right, but you didn't see it on film a lot, and,
right.
and maybe a few times when you saw it, you saw him do it. But there was a big question mark about that, and I asked that question from the very beginning. Was like, okay, because the pass rush, if you're looking at a defensive lineman, pass rush versus run defense, I'd say it's like 70-30 split in terms of importance. The pass rush is way more important than being able to stop the run. And when you're drafting guys that high, they have to be pass rushers first. And the Eagles have always looked at it that way. So this was a bit of a surprise. There was a scheme element to this too, because they did have three-man fronts they were using a fair amount of, but you can't draft for scheme in my mind. So let's say, again, young, that's a position. It takes time for a lot of times for these guys to really find their way. But when I look at him in terms of his skill set, I don't see it as much as I see with Jalen Carter, when it's just like, yeah, no brainer. This guy is going to be a pass rushing force in the NFL.
Bill, did you have a last one? Go ahead.
Yeah, when you talk about pass rush, best pass rusher on the team, Hassan Reddick, going into the final year of his deal, he's going to want a new deal. He talked about it even before this season, but the Eagles probably want to sign him to an extension. He has a $21 million cap hit this year under this contract. What do you think happens with Hassan Reddick?
Yeah, I think that's a big question heading into this offseason. And I'm not really sure it's a foregone conclusion that he's back because of that contract and because what can they afford? And they have Josh Sweat, who's got more guaranteed to him this coming year than Reddick. So whereas I think Reddick is probably, I would say, a better player than Sweat, although Sweat's a very good player, it may be hard for them to find room to make Hassan fit, and maybe Hassan doesn't want to come back. Obviously he'll go where the money takes him, and that is absolutely his right. But the Eagles have some, I agree with you when you're looking at the cap number. They have some finagling they're going to have to do in terms of that number. And, he wasn't clearly happy with the way he's being utilized down the stretch. I think there was also some internal, how do I want to say this, in terms of how he was playing. Whereas I don't think it was just him. There were a lot of guys I think were chasing numbers rather than playing the scheme. And I think that's part of the reason why you saw the defense and certainly the pass rush struggle down the stretch, because guys are, if he isn't coming back, and understandably so, he's like, I gotta get sacks. That's how that's how you get good big contract sack numbers. They're not looking at pressures. I guess they are to some extent. So I think that played a role in it as well. So I think Hassan Reddick is definitely going to be a pivotal player to look at this offseason in terms of what the Eagles do.
That's fascinating. I don't know where the pass rush is coming from if he's not here, Jeff. Other than Sweat, it's wow. All right. Last one. I know you had a little bit of a dust up with Fletcher Cox, and I know you have a relationship with him, but it was a little testy that day. First off, just from a reporter standpoint, how do you handle that? Like, what's the best route to go? And do you think he'll be back? It's kind of a two-part for me.
Yeah. I guess I'll talk about the football part, which is really what I typically only want to focus on, and the reporting part. Because, my job is not to be part of the story, and nor will I ever make myself part of the story. Fletcher, I thought he had his best year in 3-4 years.
Me too.
I saw 3 guys hustling down to the final whistle in Tampa: BG, Fletcher Cox, and Milton Williams. I'm not saying other guys weren't giving all their effort, but I'm talking like extra effort. Mm-hmm. And Fletcher all season was probably the best defensive lineman. So he can keep playing if he wants to in this league. There's no doubt about it. And I wouldn't be surprised if he decided he wants to keep playing. The Eagles will bring him back. Obviously, probably at a reduced number. The indications, Jordan Davis was talking like he wasn't coming back. I've heard it from elsewhere too, that they expect him to retire as well. So, maybe he didn't want to talk about it, and maybe he needs some time too, like Kelsey, to kind of sort through his feelings about his future in the NFL. So we'll let that play out. But no matter what, 12 years in the NFL, Fletcher will go down as one of the greatest Eagles of all time. He will certainly be like one of the automatic entries into the Eagles Hall of Fame, and he deserves consideration for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. To answer your second question, I've had, I think, for the most part, a fine relationship with Fletcher. I've covered him all 12 years that he's been in Philadelphia. Never really had any incident with him. And just recently I walked up to his locker stall and he answered my questions about another story I was doing. So I have immense respect for Fletcher, as a football player and generally for the most part in how we interacted for 12 seasons. And then, but sometimes I'm in a position where I have to, write stories that they may not like or agree with. And that is certainly their right. In this case, though, I thought I was asking a very fair question about Nick Sirianni that other players had been asked, and that Fletcher a few questions later was asked and chose to answer. So, that's how it played out. No big deal. I'm a big boy. I come down there. I write those stories. I know that they're not everyone's always going to be happy about it. But I've covered this team for over 15 years, and I've had I'm not saying everyone loves me in there, but that's not my job.
Right.
Certainly it helps in some respects to have the relationships. And I feel like my reporting and the stories that I've written over the last 15 years show that I have very good relationships in that locker room with a lot of players. But that's not my job to become best friends with these guys.
Sure.
I'm a beat reporter. I'm a journalist those are what I am first and foremost. And then in terms of the relationships, the relationship with Fletch, I mean, maybe that factored into how he wanted to answer that question. But nevertheless, I stand by that question. And again, don't feel very comfortable when I'm being made part of the story, because that's not my goal ever.
Yeah, I understand. I respect the way you go about your business, Jeff. You know that. So we appreciate you giving us a couple of minutes here, Jeff. And we know it's minute to minute, day to day, every second something's happening Eagles wise. But we appreciate you. And again, check out Jeff on Twitter/X at Jeff_McLane. Inquirer.com and Uncovering the Birds. Jeff, where can people get that? I know it's through Odyssey, but they can get it wherever they listen to their podcasts.
Yeah, anywhere you can get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, you name it. We're on there, and we will have maybe something to sum up the season once they make a decision, Nick Sirianni, and then we'll have our next kind of off-season proper, season 2 off-season proper, where it'll be more kind of like a variety of stories of past, present, perhaps future.
All right, Jeff. Thanks, man. Keep up the good work. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, take
Thanks,
care.
man.
That is Jeff McLane of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Bill, let's get a quickie in. We'll react to some of the things that Jeff had to say, and we'll also look back at the offseason that was this past offseason for the Eagles, and may explain how we got here to a degree, whether it's drafts, trades, free agency, etc. We'll dive into all those kind of things. He's Bill Colarulo. I'm Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. I want to tell you about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because it is a challenge to find the right person to trust with your hard-earned money. But I can tell you from personal experience that I found someone, and that is Jim and Principal Financial Group. Whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review, you might have a small business and you need help getting your employee benefits off the ground. That's another resource that Jim can help you with. Personally, first off, I love the fact that I can call him at any time, and he's always going to get back to me. He's always going to explain things, technical things that if you're not a financial expert that you may not know, may not be aware of, he's going to make you aware of it. It's to me, it's one of the great things about the way he goes about his business. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You could also email him, Murray, Murray, .jim@principal.com. That's Murray.jim@principal.com.
Go to